Hey, guess what day it is?
Is it Tuesday?
Yeah, you got that right. I'm Alex.
And I'm Amber.
And this is True Crime and Chill.
Before we get started, we want to remind everyone that we are not detectives, mind readers, ghost hunters, time travelers, or journalists. We are just two people that love true crime and bringing you stories that we feel you should know about.
Exactly. So if you have an issue with the way we present a case or the information presented in it, remember that we are human beings and we are not perfect. So please tell us in a polite way on how to change it. But for now, on with this week's episode.
Let's do it.
Okay, so before I start this episode, one, it's good to actually be back and not just oohing and ahhing for the shock factor. Two, let's just audibly just love over my coffee cup, okay? For those you don't know, it's David from Schitt's Creek.
I can't see it. Your background has taken over it. You have to put it right in front of your shirt.
Oh. Can you see
there
it
you
now?
go.
There we go. I love it. I don't know what it looks like because my screen's not up right now, but yeah, no. So for those of you who don't know, I do collect novelty coffee cups. So whenever I see one, I need to get it. So yeah, that's just a little fun fact about me. Where Amber's a Disney nerd, I am a novelty coffee cup collector.
Disney nerd, among other things.
Disney. Disney. Okay.
I may or may not be burning a Disney scented candle right now.
Ooh, see, I told you. Told you, Disney. Okay, so before we get into this, I used to actually work at the prison where Jessica's killer is imprisoned right now. And let me tell you, I started studying this case before I actually got the job at the prison. I don't work there anymore. Not bad blood. It just wasn't as much as I love working corrections. It just wasn't a good job for me at the time. So basically, after studying the case so long, I actually realized that he was imprisoned at Kentucky State, which was not something that I had anticipated. So we had to put this case off. But seeing this guy in person, it was actually a really surreal experience. So it's really weird talking about this and stuff, actually seeing the guy. So our story starts September 10th, 1999. Edna and Mike Dishon lived in Bullitt County, Kentucky with their three children, Jessica, Bubby, and Chris. Now, I'm assuming that Bubby's name is something different, and Bubby is just a nickname that they called him, but for privacy reasons, he just preferred to be called Bubby, because they never really showed him on TV. They just showed Chris. They all lived right outside of Shepherdsville, Kentucky. Now, last week we'd actually talked about small towns and stuff. Now, Shepherdsville is kind of like that. It's very small. Everybody knew everyone. Everybody was in everybody's business. Everybody was 5 generations of whoever lived there before. It's a very small town. And it's probably about 2 hours away from me and stuff. And so it's a very small town. So on that morning, Edna and Mike had gotten their 2 younger kids up and ready to go to work and school. Their oldest daughter, Jessica, was still sleeping, and both parents just kind of let her sleep in, knowing that she could take herself to school in the car. So the kids actually left. So the boys actually left for the house around 6:30, I believe it was. And Edna had already left before then, and Mike had left. So Jessica would have been gone probably about 6:45, 7 o'clock. So Edna actually came home from shopping trip probably about 12:30, 1 o'clock, and noticed that Jessica's car was actually still in the driveway. Nothing to really be alarmed about, but her mom senses were kind of going off a little bit at that time. She went in, she actually opened up the car door, and she noticed that Jessica's purse and her shoe were actually in the car as well. Just one shoe, not both, just one. So she ended up calling Mike and being like, "Hey, did you take Jessica to school today?" Mike was like, "No." She goes, "Okay, well, do you know if somebody else came and picked her up? Is her car working okay?" Mike is like, "No, I mean, you have the extra key. Why don't you turn the car on and see, and we'll just kind of go from there." So when she turns the car on, the car's working perfectly. So there was no reason for the car to still stay there. So she calls Mike probably about 1:30 and says, "You need to get home now. Something's wrong." So when Mike gets back to the house, they ended up checking the car a little bit more, and Mike ended up finding her cell phone, and the cell phone had just 9-1 dialed into it.
So let's rewind for just a second, because I do have a question. Did her mother go in the house and look for Jessica?
No.
Okay,
Oh, wait. Yes, she did. Yes, she did go looking for Jessica. She went and searched her room. She went and searched the house, but her room was, as she left it that morning, the house was quiet, like everything was good. And it wasn't until she actually got back out to the car that she was like, something is going on.
Yeah. Okay. And so since the phone said 911, it seems as though Jessica was possibly trying to dial 911.
Yes. Now, Amber, you probably remember cell phones back then.
Mm-hmm.
I do not, because it was 99, and I think I was like, let's see, I think I was like 7 at the time. So, I mean, that really wasn't a huge thing for me. But this wasn't something that was used for anything besides calling, correct?
So I got my first cell phone around Christmas of the year 2000 when I was 16. And I can tell you that free nights and weekends was a thing because they wanted people to get more cell phones. And texting was like 10 cents per character.
Yeah.
Not per text, per character.
Well, see, she didn't have like a texting phone. Like when I actually saw the pictures of it and stuff, it was like, it looked like one of those like bigger cell phones.
Yeah, you could still text on those. It just was hard.
Okay.
Like if you wanted to type the letter S, you had to type the 8 key 4 times.
See, I know T9. Okay, I grew up with T9. I know T9, but I mean like the
T9
cell phone
did not exist yet. You had to individually type out the letters. So if to get
T9,
A, you'd push 1
not T9
the first time.
But like, because like I had to do that too. I had to type it, like to get S, type it 4 times. But
you could type it until it brought up the word that you wanted. That's what T9 was.
When I got my first cell phone, they did not have that option.
Right, that's what this phone would do then. You could still text,
but this one, it didn't look like it had a texting option. Like the screen looked like it had to have been about like that big.
Sure, you could still text on it, I promise.
That's weird.
Yeah.
That is weird. But they noticed now mind you, it was her cell phone, her purse, and one shoe that was left in the car. Okay, one shoe.
Mm-hmm.
So they obviously realized that something was going on with this because like all of this stuff was left in the car. Jessica just wasn't the type to just kind of get up and go somewhere like without telling her parents. She was a very responsible teenager and stuff. She was like 16, 17 at the time. I actually think she just turned 17. And so like the Dishons realized something was going on. So they went to the local sheriff's station because that's what they had, is they had a sheriff's station. That's how small the town was. And the sheriff's station was actually located in Shepherdsville. So the Dishons lived like on the outskirts of it. So where the sheriffs would. So they asked them for help. And the sheriffs basically were like, you know what? Like she probably just ran away, come back the next morning, give it the night, before getting worried. She's a teenager. She'll probably call you. Like she probably just took off, like stuff like that.
So your standard, it's a teenager, they probably ran away. Which is sometimes true.
Yeah, and in some cases it is, but how often are we seeing these cases where it's not?
Mostly with females, it's not.
Exactly.
But that's just because most of the runaway ones don't really get reported and put in the news, so.
Yeah. So Edna and Mike were upset, understandably. But the sheriff's station was, like I said, it was this little ho-bunk sheriff's station that had maybe like 3 or 4 people working in it. And so they were stretched really thin as it was. But at the same time, Edna knew, she was like, look, this is not like Jessica. I know that she didn't just run away. Right. And she's like, Jessica wouldn't just leave without telling her parents. She's like, plus, what about all the stuff she left behind? Yep. What girl leaves town or vanishes with her phone or her purse?
And she was like 16, 17. So at that age, I was just having a discussion with somebody about this, I think today or yesterday.
Yeah.
The days just kind of blend together anymore. But, I remember when I was like 16, 17, I very much was in this like I knew better than my parents did. Mm-hmm. And, it wasn't like I ever really felt like I wanted to run away because at that point I was close enough to 18 that it was like, when I turn 18, da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
For the record, I did not end up moving out till I was 20. Totally different story. But, my family and I are close, though. And I think that if I had run away, my parents would have been like, okay, if she's not at some rainbow event, which was probably the case, but they would know that I was there, right? So if she's not here at this thing, then, something's wrong. Because I wouldn't just run away. But that's not to say that, usually, though, your parents generally know if you are potentially a runaway scenario. And if it's not really something that she would have been inclined to do, then I wish the police would have taken it a little more seriously to begin with.
Yeah.
Especially
And
considering
Jessica,
stuff that was left in the car.
Yeah, and Jessica was like not that kind of kid. From everything I could find about Jessica and from what everybody had said about Jessica, she was very much the responsible child. Like, she told her parents where she was going. She tried to get home when she said that she was going to be home. If not, then she would call them and tell them that she was going to be late. Like, she
didn't have an unhappy home life or anything that she would want to run away from.
Exactly. And from what I could see, like, she was a responsible child. And so this was just something that was just super out of the ordinary for her. So eventually Mike and Edna go home and they wait. And they wait 24 hours until the next morning. And I bet you anything, those 24 hours were probably some of the most excruciating hours of their life.
Yeah.
Because like, I can't imagine like my kid going missing and nobody doing anything about it. And having to go home and wait 24 hours, which is honestly why I feel like the whole filing a missing persons report thing is bullshit. Like, even if you're not filing a full missing persons report, even if the police take down the name and the information and do a little bit of digging, like if they end up finding the person and she's like, no, I'm fine, I just don't want to go home right now, then they can at least go back and tell the parents, you know what, we got a hold of her, she's okay, this is what's going on, not this whole, oh, you have to wait 24 to 72 hours before you can report them.
But when you consider how stretched thin the police force, you even said that before, that they're stretched thin.
But they could have brought in state police. They could have done a little bit of looking on their own, realized that this wasn't on Jessica, and they could have brought in state police. And I wasn't the only person that was thinking this, because we're about to get into something a little bit later about who else was thinking this.
Sure, I'm not disagreeing that. I'm just saying you already said that they were stretched thin. And so they're going to do what they can to say, look, we have to wait this amount of time. Look, she could have just run away. Like, they're not thinking, because I understand. I see both sides of it, I think, though, at this point. But I know there's more to this because I actually have heard this case before. So,
oh yeah. So they end up waiting the 24 hours. So on September 11th, 1999, they go into that police station bright and early. Like, I mean, the second they are able to. She's not home yet. There's no sign of her. Where is she? Let's do something. So the station finally took the report and decided to send some people out. Mike and Edna went home to wait for them, and Mike figured that, since they finally took the report, they were going to call some state police in to kind of help. He figured, they were going to come down and swarm the place. There were going to be, like, dogs searching for her, like, scents, like, they were going to take her car, they were going to take evidence. Nothing. 2 police officers showed up. That's it. Mm-hmm. They quickly asked Mike and Edna some questions, dismissed them, looked through Jessica's car without, like, any kind of gloves. So any kind of fingerprint evidence that was in there was destroyed. Looked at everything and said, oh yeah, there's nothing here. And then went back to the station. Didn't take any evidence. Didn't impound the car. Didn't dust for fingerprints. Didn't talk to anybody around. Didn't even say, oh, we're going to start searching for her. They just said, oh, there's nothing here, and just left.
So really undertrained deputies.
Not even that. These guys fully knew what they were doing. They just didn't feel like doing it.
Did they, though?
It seemed
like how do you just out of curiosity, how do you actually know that they knew what to do?
I mean, it's kind of like common sense to wear gloves when searching a crime scene.
Right. That's what I'm saying. It is common sense, but common sense isn't so common. It was mishandled one way or the other. I'm just saying, we don't know that they were even fully trained to be able to handle this. Because if this was a small town, this is not a common occurrence. They probably weren't trained on how to do this. Now, of course, to us, it makes sense to use gloves, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'd be like, yeah, put gloves on because there's potential fingerprints, there's DNA, there's this. Like, to me, that makes sense. We also sit and study true crime all day long. Like,
but even without studying true crime, it's kind of like if you're touching something that's foreign that could be part of a crime scene, even without studying true crime, like, it's still like,
it would make sense.
Maybe I don't want my fingerprints floating around in this.
Right. You would think. But let's take into consideration, there was that TikTok I sent you about the lady that was like, if I ever get killed, don't call the police, call 2 white women who have a true crime podcast. They'll figure out what happened.
Yeah, because, not gonna lie, police are kind of inept sometimes. But like the fact that they just searched her car and headed out and didn't take any kind of evidence. Basically, the questions that they asked them were just the same things that they were asked when they took the statement. When was the last time you saw her? What was Jessica wearing? What does she look like?
Right.
How old is she? What was she run away? The normal questions.
Yeah. The basic assumptions.
So they were pissed.
Of course.
Right? For a good reason. Like, Edna and Mike were like, look, this is ridiculous. They didn't feel like they were being taken seriously at all. They didn't feel like Jessica's case was being taken seriously at all. This is now the second day into her, the first day into her disappearance, technically. And there's still no sign of anybody coming out to even help them search for her. So on September 12th, they actually got on live TV and decided to give an interview about Jessica. And they decided to say how they felt about the department and everything in between.
Yeah, I bet that didn't end well.
It really didn't. It really didn't do anything to jumpstart the department, though. That's the issue. All it did was just piss off the families of the sheriff's office. And one of the guys that they were actually going after was Sheriff Paul Parsley. He was the guy who was in charge, basically. He was the guy who was in charge of Jessica's case. And Mike was going after them for not doing their job. He said, look, there should have been people out here looking for her. We shouldn't be the ones looking for her. They should be bringing in state police. They should be doing, if you guys are understaffed to do this, you guys can call the state police who are not understaffed, who can come down and help you and do this. He basically said, like, this is not just, my car got stolen. He's like, my child is missing and nobody is taking this seriously.
Yeah.
And the sheriff was like, I totally get it. I do. But like, we're just so understaffed. And it's like, you can only hear we're so understaffed so many times before you go. So then bring people in. Like, we get it. You're understaffed, but you have the state police. You had Louisville, which was I think 2 hours away from Shepherdsville, who could have had some police officers come down. They had people that they could have called. They could have called the FBI, but they didn't. They just didn't do jack shit to do anything. So by then it was almost 2 days since Jessica had gone missing. In normal cases, you have about 72 hours to find the missing person alive.
I think it's less than that now. I think it's 48.
Yeah, it's actually less than that now. But back then it was about 72 hours to actually, if they hadn't been killed as soon as they were taken. Back then it was about 72 hours to find the person alive before it diminished each passing day. Now, you have the stories out there like the Ariel Castro captives. You have Elizabeth Smart. You have J.C. Dugard. You have those rare once-in-a-lifetime stories that come out and stuff. But those are literally rare once-in-a-lifetime stories.
Yeah.
And though the sheriff knew this, he also couldn't work with what he didn't have. And that didn't really sit right with Mike. And so it kind of circles back to, yeah, we get you guys were understaffed, but there were other outlets that you could have called in help for.
Sure.
Even if it was just, hey, can you guys spare 2 or 3 extra people to come down and help us with this?
In order to call in those reinforcements, though, I think the case has to be open for a certain amount of time before they can do that.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. If there is a missing child under the age of 18, you are short-staffed. You are able to call in all the help that you need as soon as it happens.
Was it that way then, though?
Mm-hmm. Especially for a town that short. Especially for a town that small. If you are so understaffed that a child goes missing and you end up not being able to find them, or you don't have the manpower to do what you need to do to find them, then you are able to call surrounding police stations and be like, hey, we kind of need some help down here. Can you come help us?
So
but they didn't put anything in the news. Nothing went into the news until Mike and Edna went on the news. They didn't really put anything out about Jessica. They just kind of were like, oh, we'll take her stuff. They were convinced she was a runaway.
Right. That's why I said they were so in their convictions that she was a runaway that they were just like, okay, yeah, we'll take this seriously.
Yeah, she's definitely a runaway.
Yeah.
So Mike and his family started searching because nobody else was looking for Jessica. Nobody else was doing anything to help Jessica. So they started searching. And as they were trying to figure out where to search for her, because this place is huge. Bullitt County is huge.
Yeah.
And she could have been anywhere. So while they're trying to figure out where to search for her, Mike's brother Stanley actually suggested, you know what? If somebody wanted to hide the body, the best place would be the river bottoms.
So the bottoms of the rivers.
No. It's actually a place called the River Bottoms.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So this place is actually really spooky. I've looked up pictures from it and everything, and from what I could find and from what I could see from interviews and stuff, if there was something bad that was going on in Shepherdsville and Bullitt County, it would be at the River Bottoms. And it was just a really spooky place. It was a really spooky place. So everybody goes down there. Family, friends, Stanley and Mike included. About halfway through looking, Stanley actually starts to get like violently ill and just throwing up. Mike wanted to make sure like his brother was okay and was like, okay, are you good? Like, is everything good? And so somebody actually ended up taking Stanley home, and Mike ended up staying and like searching more. Eventually it got too dark. Everybody kind of had to go back in. They were all just going to meet up the next night and go back out. So at home, again, it was different. You know, we're about 3 days into Jessica's disappearance and stuff. It was quieter without her. There was this looming darkness over the house. Everybody was kind of just wondering like what the hell was going to happen, where their sister was, where their daughter was, stuff like that. And so Chris had actually gone out to feed the dogs, and he comes running back inside like a bat out of hell. It's just like, I heard Jessica screaming, help me, help me. Like he said that he heard her screaming, help me, help me.
Yeah.
So Mike actually grabbed his gun and ran outside. An interview on Cold Case Files that actually saw him in. He said, if I found whoever was with her, they would be a dead man. And honestly, I believed him.
Yeah.
Because like it kind of goes into that whole thing of like, you would do anything to protect your kid.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
well, just like
no matter what.
Mothers lifting cars up off their children. I mean, it's an instinct that we get as parents, like, you know, throwing ourselves over our children to protect them, so on and so forth. So I fully believe that
we'll sacrifice our own lives if that means having our children be alive.
Yep. Fully believe it. Mm-hmm.
And stuff. And so he was ready. Like he was ready to do anything and stuff. And so
I mean, the thought that she'd still be alive at all when he was starting to believe that she's dead, that's going to bring a whole new burst of all sorts of things. Like,
well, and honestly, I don't think like her ever being dead went into his mind, even though like, you know, they fully went out looking at the river bottoms to like hide a body and stuff. I don't think her being dead ever like entered his mind until the day that they found her.
Yeah.
And even then it was kind of just like an afterthought, like, oh, she could be, but you know what? We're not going to think about that.
Right.
And stuff.
It's hard to think about. Yeah.
Yeah. Cause it's terrible. You don't ever want to think about your kid like that. So Mike and Chris go running outside. And as they're running outside, Stanley is actually pulling up the driveway and gets out and is like, because like he was coming back to the house to see if there was any more news and stuff. And so when he gets out, Mike updates him. He's like, look, we heard Jessica screaming, help me in the woods. Like we're going to go see if we can find her. And Stanley's like, let's go find her. And as they search the woods, they end up seeing somebody up on a hill burning what looked to be like clothes in a burn barrel. The person doing it was the next door neighbor, Bucky Brooks. Now, where the Dishons lived, it was property. It was their house and then a whole bunch of property and then woods. And then their neighbor was the same thing. House, whole bunch of property and then woods. Now, the Brooks family and the Dishon family, their properties were right next to each other. And they had really bad blood. Like, it was just a cumulative of things that just built up over the years. And
it happens. It happens. I mean, there's a guy who lives across the street from my dad who tried to sue him for building this garage that blocked his view.
Are you wait, seriously?
Yeah, seriously. He tried literally every avenue he could to get my dad to stop building this garage on his property because it blocked his postage stamp view of the water. And to the point where he was calling inspectors and city stuff, and lawyers were called in, cease and desist. It was everything. Finally, my dad told him, he's like, look, if you want to buy my property off me for $2 million, you can do whatever you want with it.
Yeah. And fun fact, he could actually buy the air above the property, the space above the property.
Sure.
But that would be even more than $2 million. So good luck there, buddy.
Where the garage is on the property, though, it's not taller than the actual house itself.
Yeah.
In terms of height, it's like a lower level, but it's anyway. But it's bad blood can happen for lots of different reasons. Property line wars. Easements, all sorts of stuff. It's people get ridiculous about it sometimes.
Well, and it was bad. And so and Bucky's farm was the only farm that wasn't searched initially because he wouldn't let anybody on his farm to search. And what's weird is that when Jessica actually went missing, I guess Bucky had called Mike saying please don't kill me, and then would hang up.
Don't be suspicious. Don't be suspicious. Don't be suspicious. Don't be suspicious.
Yeah, and he didn't really give a reason why he was doing that. He was just doing it. So Mike automatically assumed he was talking about Jessica. And honestly, with him burning the clothes, with him not letting them check the property, with the phone calls, it really looked like he was the person that did it.
Yeah.
Eventually, that gave police enough oomph to like bring in cadaver dogs.
Oh.
So they searched the Burks property all over. They've searched all the buildings on the property, the barn, the sheds, the house, everything. And they end up finding Bucky's burn barrel that he had been using that night. The dogs hooked onto a scent in that barrel, and police ended up finding 2 pairs of gloves with a cadaver scent on them. But they still didn't arrest Bucky. And if there had been like bones, like bits of bone in the barrel,
right,
or like hair or clothing or something in the barrel still, then that would have probably given them a little bit more to go on.
Mm-hmm.
But because it was just the cadaver smell and then 2 pairs of gloves, there really wasn't much that they could do because it wasn't enough evidence to arrest somebody. And so Mike figured that would be enough to arrest him, but it wasn't. So police left again with no answers to give the Dishon family. But they were certain that Bucky did it. They just didn't have any proof. Eventually, Mike said, "To hell with you guys," and called the FBI. Now, when he talked to the FBI basically said, "You know what? We cannot come in unless the police invite us in or a family invites us in." Mm-hmm. So we always knew that, only the police can invite them in. Apparently, if it's a case in your family, you can invite the FBI in on request of the family.
You can invite them. It doesn't mean they have to take it, though.
Yeah, you can invite them, but they don't have to take it with the police either. Mm-hmm. So in the interview that I saw, Mike goes, "Well, I'm Mike Dishon. I'm Jessica's father, and I'm inviting you guys in." And he said that when the FBI came down, he basically told the sheriffs to go back to their little Hobunk town in Shepherdsville and leave them the hell alone while they figured this out. Which is something that I don't blame him for doing.
No.
So once Mike invites the FBI and gets them brought in, the FBI brought in their big gun. They did searches throughout the area. They ended up doing helicopter searches. They had people in the ponds out there, like in the woods and the rivers and the like areas and stuff. They were looking for Jessica. They ended up zeroing in on Bucky and searched his entire property again. In one of the buildings, they ended up finding a picture in the barn that was of Jessica. And there was absolutely no reason at all for him to have a picture of Jessica unless it was like this weird, like creepy thing. I mean, it was always going to be a weird, creepy thing. But they took it to Mike, and Mike confirmed that, yeah, that was Jessica. And so even though it wasn't enough to arrest him, they did bring Bucky in for questioning. Mm-hmm. And his story was just like all over the freaking board. Like first it was, "Oh yeah, I saw Jessica that day, the day she went missing around 4 p.m. And then it was, "Oh no, there's no way I could have seen Jessica that day because I was having sex with my wife." But his wife was like, "No, we weren't having sex."
Okay, few things to unpack here.
You're like, let's just roll back a little bit.
Just a bit. First of all, if you can't get your story straight, that's an issue. Always.
Yeah.
Like,
that's an issue in itself. But before you go on, the reason why he couldn't get his story straight will probably come out a little bit later. But
yeah. No, I know. However, I mean, Jessica's picture being on his property at all,
it's weird as hell.
It's weird. However, here's the thing: if it had been, if it's anybody else, like literally anybody else, especially somebody who knows about this bad blood between the families, planting a picture of her on that property, genius.
Oh yeah.
Sorry, but that's just flat out genius.
Oh God, yeah.
But also, like, of all the things, like, oh no, I knew exactly the time I was having sex with my wife.
Right?
Okay, so are you in the point in your relationship where you have to schedule it? Because I get that in some relationships you hit that point where you have to schedule it out.
4:00 that afternoon, we were having, it's in my date book.
Yeah, it's in my planner. That to me, though, is just, and then also the wife be like, "No, we weren't." Like,
the wife is just like,
she could be telling the truth, and she could also be like, "I don't want to admit that I sleep with my husband because he's ugly." There's, like I said, there's a lot to unpack here. Like,
okay, so September 27th, 1999, 17 days after Jessica went missing, somebody was actually driving their car down by the river bottoms. They ended up cutting across so that way they could go home quicker. And ended up seeing something kind of propped up against the tree. Getting out, the woman actually went over and immediately ran back, called police, and was like, "I think I found a body." Like, I think I found a body. And so the police got down there. The FBI got down there and kind of cordoned the area off and everything. And it was a body. It was a body propped up against a tree, and they did believe it was Jessica. And so Sheriff Parsley had actually driven to the Dishons, and he went to the front door, and he knocked on the door, and he said, "We found Jessica." And Mike goes, "Well, is she alive?" And the sheriff goes, "No." And so he tells Edna, and immediately, as soon as the words leave his mouth that Jessica is dead, immediately Edna is yelling, "Tell me she's a runaway now. Tell me that she's a runaway, because you said that she was a fucking runaway. Tell me she's a runaway." Like, just yelling. And honestly, I don't blame her.
Do not blame her.
3 days. Like, at this time, they didn't know that she had been alive for 3 days. At this time, they had not known that she had been alive for 3 days while they were saying that she was a runaway. They did not know this. But, like, later it comes out, and Edna realizes this, that her daughter had been alive for 3 days while they were trying to look for her, and nobody was taking her seriously. So maybe if somebody had taken it seriously that first day, maybe she could have been found, but we don't know. So Mike tells the boys, and he tells Edna, and the boys, like, took it really hard, obviously. Like, that was their big sister and everything. Like, the boys took it really hard. And so he tells Edna, he's like, "I can't go down there." So Edna ends up going down with Sheriff Parsley by herself to identify Jessica's body. She was propped up against the tree. Her face was basically unrecognizable. Like, Edna said, you could not tell that it was her based off her face.
She's been out in the elements for weeks.
Yeah, she's like, you could not tell that it was her based off her face. And so she had fingers missing, she had a broken jaw, and she was decomposed. And she also, the coroner had also said that her cause of death was strangulation. So the only thing, so Edna was, like, still kind of, like, in that mode of maybe this isn't Jessica. But then Jessica had a butterfly tattoo on her body, and Edna saw it. And she realized that was Jessica. Yes, when I first realized a butterfly tattoo, I was like, wait a minute. But you have to remember, things were a little bit more lax in Kentucky in the 1990s. You have to remember, this is Kentucky in the 1990s.
Okay.
Like, backwoods tattoo artist, probably. You got to remember this. Like, this wasn't Washington in a rainbow girl's life with very strict parents.
Okay, that's hurtful. I'm not kidding. That's hurtful.
Well, I'm just saying, because I wouldn't have been able to get her tattoo either. My dad would have fucking killed me.
It had nothing to, no, it's not even that. I'm pretty sure it's a federal law.
Not back then.
Yes, back then. There's even jokes about it in The Simpsons.
I know it's a federal law now, but I know back then it wasn't.
No, there was a joke about it in The Simpsons where they were in a mall and turning all the stores to Starbucks.
What? What do you mean turning all the stores to Starbucks?
It was a joke in The Simpsons. Like, Bart went in to get a tattoo, and he's like, "You're too young. I can't give you a tattoo." And then he's like, "Well, whatever. This is going to be a Starbucks in 10 minutes anyway." And then it shows Bart walking through the mall with a mom tattoo, and every store in the mall, or maybe it was a piercing, but every store in the mall was all Starbucks.
Let's see. Kentucky. So Kentucky, there is no specified age. Yep. In Kentucky, there's no specified age. Parent or guardian must give written consent. But yeah, so in Kentucky, as of right now, too, minimum age with parent or guardian consent is non-specific, but you do have to have a written consent from your parent. It has to be notarized. So as long as your parent is okay with it.
Because I remember my friend's sister tried to get a tattoo for her 16th birthday.
There's no expectations either. There's no expectation. There's no exemptions either. Ear piercing also requires a written notarized consent under the age of 18. Washington, let's go down to Washington because I just kind of want to see.
Ash's sister tried to get a tattoo.
Washington is 18.
Yeah.
Piercings accepted. No, piercings, like, whatever.
Yep.
Cannot have tattoos, body piercings, or other body arts for intoxicated individuals.
Duh.
And that's it. So yeah, so Washington is completely different from Kentucky. So this is like backwoods Kentucky. So back then, backwoods Kentucky was basically not backwoods Kentucky, but like back then, Kentucky, and just like now, it was as long as she had notarized consent, then they didn't really see anything wrong with it. And butterflies were like a huge thing in Jessica's life. Like, they were all over her room. They were her favorite animal. So obviously she got a butterfly tattoo on her. But that was, in the end, the way that her mother was actually able to identify her daughter's body, which is really sad.
It is.
But so eventually they brought Bucky in for a polygraph test. So they were like, okay, so we have the body, we have this, let's bring Bucky in for a polygraph test. Now, another fun fact I've learned while researching this case, polygraph is used to get a confession. Okay. Only that confession is admissible in court, but you cannot bring up that you use a polygraph to get that confession. As soon as you bring up that you use a polygraph to get that confession, everything is off the table. So keep that in mind.
Right. Which is why it was interesting that they were allowed to, that's how the Chris Watts case was kind of like, yeah.
But, I mean, at the same time, we knew fucking Chris did it, so. But, okay, so just keep that in mind for our listeners and stuff. So they bring Bucky in for the polygraph test, and surprise, surprise, he failed. And that was when they formally charged him with Jessica's death. They were like, okay, look, we're arresting you for Jessica Dishon's murder. This is what's going on. Prosecution had actually formally decided to charge him with Jessica's murder, even though all evidence was circumstantial. Like, literally, it was kind of like, okay, well, this could be him, but at the same time, it could be someone else, but this is the only person that we have right now. So the defense, while prosecution was trying to prove that Bucky had done it, the defense obviously was trying to prove that he hadn't. And they actually had a pretty good case going.
That is the defense's job.
Bucky, they did their job. So they end up asking Bucky, like, if we find your prints on Jessica's body, what then? Because Bucky had been adamant. I did not kill Jessica. I was never around her. I didn't do anything to her. I have not killed Jessica. And so when they asked him that, he was like, well, then I'll have to say that I did it. But, like, I'm not talking till then.
Right.
Which is smart.
Yep.
So, defense then goes into trying to prove that the case was handled badly. Okay. So defense brought in James Coulter, who said that he had seen Jessica the day that he was a drug dealer. And he said that he saw Jessica the day that she went missing because she had brought drugs from him.
May I ask what kind of drugs?
It never said.
Okay. Because, I mean, saying she's a drug user, I mean, it depends on the drug itself. Because, like, there's some that you use more recreationally, and then there's some that you're addicted to. I'm assuming it wasn't
just marijuana that he sold. I'm assuming that it wasn't marijuana that he sold.
But that's still just an assumption.
But I'm assuming that it's not. But they never actually said. But at the same time, too, Jessica's family swore up and down that she wasn't like that. Her friends were like, she's not like that. The guy that she was dating at the time was like, she wouldn't touch the stuff.
Right.
Like, wouldn't even smoke pot. Like, so it's like, but my question was, it's like, my thing was, and I couldn't find out why defense thought that this James guy was so good for it. I never got that. I thought that maybe like they were just trying to find that, you could put any circumstantial proof on anybody that could possibly be it and prove, but it never really got that far. Because they proved that her body parts were left out and not frozen, damaging any further evidence on her. So basically meaning that her body was left out. And what I mean by they never actually got to prove that the circumstantial evidence could fit anybody, is by this. So everything hit kind of like a boiling point, when Detective Charlie Mann got on the stand, and he goes, quote, because they kept badgering him. Why do you think my client did this? Why do you think this guy did this? Why do you think Bucky did this? Why do you think Bucky did this? Why do you think Bucky did this? Like over and over and over again in different ways, asking him why he thought that Bucky did this. Give us a reason besides a failed polygraph that you think he did this. And he goes, and I quote, he failed a polygraph. I think that they issued to him. Unquote. And as soon as he said that in court, that's where my little polygraph tidbit comes in. Because as soon as he said that, the trial stopped. The judge ordered everything to stop. The jury was dismissed. Everybody was dismissed. The case was done. Everything was done. Bucky was let go. He was set free. The Commonwealth of Kentucky had handed all the evidence back to the Dishons. And that basically signified to them that they would not be trying Bucky. They wouldn't be trying anybody else. They wouldn't because they still could try Bucky if they found later evidence. But by handing all the evidence back to the Dishons, they were just like, sucks to be you. Here you go. Right. And Jessica's case went cold.
Yep. Closed case.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't even closed. It was just cold.
But in order for them to give evidence back, they have to have closed the case file.
No, her case was never officially closed. It just went cold.
But then why did they give back the evidence?
Because it's Kentucky, and apparently people down there don't fucking think. And it's also the 90s. Police work, we can already see throughout this story how well the police work down there.
Oh, I'm not disagreeing that point.
And it gets better. It gets better. So obviously this really hits hard for Jessica's parents. This does. Okay. This felt like, their little girl wasn't getting any kind of justice. The family was basically left with no answers. They end up fighting more about everything too. Like Edna and Mike really ended up fighting a lot. And when a child dies, especially in a very traumatic and unsolved way, it can either bring the family closer together or it can tear them apart. And unfortunately, in the case of Mike and Edna, they actually eventually divorced because of it. Like she went to Mike and said, I need a divorce. I can't do this anymore. And he gave it to her. No fuss, no hesitation. He just gave it to her. Mm-hmm. And so the cold case episode that I had watched to get some information about this case as well had actually come out in 2017. And when they were interviewing Mike, Mike had also said that him and Edna still don't talk. And that was back in 2017 when this came out. I don't know if they talk anymore still. I don't know if they've mended that. I know they're not together, but I don't know if they've mended the relationship enough to where they can actually talk for their surviving kids. But
I mean, maybe if it has to do with the kids specifically. Yeah. But the reality is that it's funny. I was actually watching a movie with my son today, and in it there was the main character, and somebody was asking him about his past, and he goes, I don't remember. And another character that was there said something about there's a difference between not remembering and not wanting to remember. And so I imagine that speaking to each other at all just consistently reminds them of the pain, and possibly also the pain that they felt together, the pain they felt separately, and then the pain they caused each other. So my guess is, unless it's important for the kids, the remaining children, they probably still don't talk.
Yeah. And I mean, and I get it. I do. But at the same time, it's really sad.
Yeah.
Because I really feel, I feel for Mike. He basically lost his family when Jessica died. And so.
You didn't just lose a child. You lost your entire family. Yeah.
Yeah. And so flash forward to June 2012. Okay. It's now been 13 years since Jessica's death. Okay. That's 13 years they've had to wake up every single day without their kid and wonder what the hell happened. And it didn't really seem like anybody was trying to do anything about it. So Lynn Hunt, she's a detective who was actually called in by the police station to come look over their cold cases. And so one of the cases was Jessica's case, because at the time that Jessica had gone missing and was murdered, her case was the biggest case in Kentucky. Like her case is the biggest unsolved case in Kentucky.
Of course.
And stuff at the time. Mm-hmm. And so, especially because of the town so small. And so they were really kind of just upset that they hadn't been able to solve it. And so they brought in Lynn, and just from watching this woman do interviews, it's not a shock that she was able to solve Jessica's case so quickly. It's not because from the time that Lynn was brought in to the time that they actually found out who it was and did, so from the time that they was brought in, about the time that they actually found out who it was and did sentencing and stuff, it took about a year and a half.
Yep.
Which doesn't seem like a long time, which doesn't seem like that short amount of time, but for that, it was a very short time. So she was able to come in and do what, people couldn't do 13 years prior. So she comes in and she doesn't really have a lot to go on.
Nope.
The Dishons have some of the evidence that the prosecution gave them and everything. The rest of it was just all papers that were kind of thrown into boxes.
They're not even in files. They were just thrown in
there wasn't any kind of filing system. It was just stuff that was written on coffee coasters, stuff that was written on napkins, stuff that was written on Post-it notes. There were no information on any of the witnesses that they had interviewed. So no date of births, no phone numbers, no addresses, no ways to find them, nothing. It was just a jumbled mess.
It was a haphazard mess. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it was kind of like everybody just oh well, and just threw it in a box, kind of put it somewhere else. So she eventually found out that the defense had hired a PI to kind of help move things along a little bit. And so she had actually gone and gotten that PI's information, and then she went to the defense. She went to the Commonwealth. She went to She went to the defense office and ended up getting all their evidence, so all their boxes and stuff. And that's when she realized, she's like, you know what? They had a pretty good freaking case going. And something that no one had caught, or either they did catch and they just didn't care, was Bucky's mental evaluation.
Mm-hmm.
So another fun fact, okay, Bucky had an IQ of 61. Okay, that means he was mentally handicapped, which means that he was not supposed to be taking a polygraph test, period.
Yep.
Because he was not capable of not only understanding the questions that were being given to him, but he was not capable of understanding the reaction that he would have to those questions. So he wasn't capable of really understanding what was going on. Yep. And nobody really cared about that. Like, everybody was just kind of like, oh, whatever.
That there was a rule about that in 99 either.
No, there was. There was. Because I was wondering about that too. The reason why I got that was because the cold case episode mentioned that. Lynn Hunt herself actually mentioned that and said that it definitely was a rule back in 99. And so it definitely is a thing, which I didn't know. I was like, interesting. Because I know, like,
I knew it was a thing. It's also something I think they brought up in, like, Making a Murderer and stuff.
Yeah,
but I did not know it was a rule that was in effect as early as that. So
yeah. So I mean, even at that, even then, it still shouldn't be admissible in court for doing that. But because I mean, look at the West Memphis 3. That's another thing right there.
Ugh.
One of the 3 kids was technically mentally handicapped.
Yep.
And so So they found that. She ended up starting to look at some of the other suspects that they had.
Yeah.
And stuff. One of them being James Coulter.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when she found James, he was in prison. And he ended up sitting down with her and he talked to her and he was like, look, I was staying at this hotel with my girlfriend. I didn't see Jessica that day. I didn't leave that hotel until afternoon the next day and everything, after she had gone missing. And so she was like, okay, well, can you tell me the hotel? And he's like, yeah, here you go. He basically gave her all the information for his alibi and stuff. And so she was like, okay, so either he's lying and I'm going to go to this hotel and there's going to be nothing to find, or he's telling the truth and it's going to exonerate him. So she goes to the hotel and they don't have records that were kept back that far. However, James had mentioned something about a maintenance man, like, working there that day. And he had actually stopped and talked with that maintenance man that day and everything. And so when she went to the hotel, she was going back to her car and she saw the maintenance man. She just happened to ask him, like, hey, were you working here back then? And he goes, yeah, no, I've been working here since then. She goes, okay, do you remember a case about a girl named Jessica Dishon? And maintenance man goes, yeah. And she's like, do you recognize this man? And she showed him a picture of James Coulter. And the guy remembered seeing him on TV. And he goes, yeah, he was here that day that she went missing. And he didn't check out until after 12 the next day. He was here with his girlfriend. So he basically backed up James's story. So now Lynn's
really kind of long time to remember that, though.
I mean, but the thing is like, I feel like that's something that would stick with me too. Like, if I see this guy and I chat with him at a hotel, and then a few weeks later I see him on TV for a trial.
Sure.
I feel like that would stick with me a little bit.
Yeah.
And stuff. Would. And so like, he basically was just like, yeah, no, you backed up a story. And so Lynn was like, like, great, we're back to square one. Don't know what we're going to do now. Eventually, Lynn's still digging into this. She gets a call from a friend about a confidential informant in Kentucky State Reformatory about the case. Now, Kentucky State Reformatory is a medium security prison. Mm-hmm. So it's not like the maximum security prison like Kentucky State Pen is, where like, they have like death row and stuff, mm-hmm. but they do have like medium security risks there and everything. So so it's a medium security prison. So she's like, you know what? I'm going to go talk to him, but I'm not really sure, because confidential informants are usually, especially prison informants, like they're usually out for one thing and one thing only, and that's to help them in the end.
Yep.
And so she goes and meets with this guy, and this guy didn't want anything. He didn't want to try and lower his sentence. He didn't want to try and get like a different place. He's just like, look, this is what I know. So September 30th, 2013, she visits him, and he basically tells her, like, I was roommates with the person who killed Jessica. We were both there for sexual relations with a child. So they were both there for pedophilia. Mm-hmm. He then tells her things that only the killer would know, or somebody who shared a cell with the killer. Okay. Basically, he said, quote, he stated that he had Jessica for a couple days and then he took her life, unquote. Quote, the reason for the mutilation, he was trying to make it look like some drug dealers or a cartel, unquote. Quote, she was having a relationship with a boy her own age. He called her names. He called him names as well. He called him things like little bastard and little bitch. He would call Jessica names as well, unquote. When the informant gave the name, it kind of just stopped the detective right there, because the name was Stanley Dishon, Jessica's uncle.
Jessica's uncle and her father's brother, who was, just to remind you, the day that they were out there searching, he got sick.
So the reason why is because Mike had already killed Jessica by that time.
Yep.
Jessica was already in the area where she would eventually be found.
Right.
Mike had almost stumbled upon Jessica's body.
Yep.
So that would have been there. So that's why Stanley started making a scene.
Yeah. He made a scene and he got sick, and he can't be the person to find her because then he becomes the suspect quickly.
Exactly. So the prison informant basically said that Stanley tortured her close by in a barn that the kids used to party at. Her personal belongings were buried under a fallen tree in the area, which really wasn't too much to go on because it was the woods.
Right.
And so Lynn was like, look, the only way we can make this stick, because he can say, yes, I was cellmates with Stanley. Yes, that could be backed up by prison records. He can say all this, but is it true? And unless we find proof, we can't just arrest Stanley. We need proof. So Lynn went outside and started digging with Jessica's brother, Bubby, and a whole bunch of other officers. And it was pouring down rain that day. Yeah. Like pouring down rain. And she said in the interview, she said that she must have dug probably about 180 holes all around that area, trying to look for this shoe or some belonging of Jessica's that proved that it was Stanley that did this, that backed up the story. And so after about 6 hours, everybody was just drenched. They were soaked. Bubby and Lynn were kind of in her car when they were driving by and everything. They were driving back to the house and stuff so she could drop Bubby off the house. And he just kind of randomly looks over and points at a barn that and goes, hey, yeah, everybody used to party there. Mm-hmm. And what do you know? It's a barn. It's a barn. It's in the area where like the informant said it would be. And so Lynn, she said, I just stopped in the middle of the road and I got out and we went and checked it out. And she was like, I don't know what I was looking for. I just knew that I needed to find what I needed to find. She's like, I knew I'd find it when I found it. Yep. And so they go into this barn and there's really not a lot of light and they don't really have any flashlights. And so they're just kind of like looking around trying to see if there's anything that sticks out. And by now it's like, 13, 14 years past Jessica's murder. So it's like, even if there was something there, who knows if it would still be viable. And so finally something catches Lynn's eye and it's underneath like the dirt and the rocks and the rubble and all that crap or whatever in like a corner of the barn. And she pulls it out and she realized what it looked like. It looked like Jessica's sheet on her bed.
Which is interesting when you take into consideration that all the evidence pointed to her being snatched from her trying to get into her car.
Exactly. And that's what I thought when I first heard this case. I was like, why would the sheet be on her bed? And then my next thought was, how did nobody notice the sheet was going missing? But then I realized but then Lynn ends up going, it was a fitted sheet. So obviously it kind of brought me back to another case that I had learned about. And it's the Gannon case in Colorado, where his stepmom, after she had done all these terrible things to him, she had stripped the bed of the sheets and put his comforter back on the bed. She has not
been charged yet, but assumingly...
Whatever.
I know.
Put the comforter back on the bed and stuff. And she has been charged. They're going to... Like, they're about to do the trial for the murder right now. Like,
it's a trial. She's been accused. She has not been charged.
She's been charged. She did it. But that is the only time you will ever hear me say directly that this person did it without a trial. She did it. But so the bed had been made, quote unquote, or whatever. So the bed had been remade in Jessica's house. Nobody noticed it because the bed was kind of remade.
Right.
And so she looks at Bubby and she's like, you know what this looks like? This looks like your sister's bedspread. And he goes, there's no way that's possible, but let's go home. So they end up going home and they end up just like racing back to the house and stuff. And they race into Jessica's room and they pull back the comforter and there's the top sheet. And then they pull back the top sheet and there's the bare bed. It was her fitted sheet that was on her bed.
Yep.
And they found it in this barn that was backed up by this confidential informant that said that Stanley had done it. So obviously, Lynn said in the interview, she was like, it was like this oh shit moment.
Yep.
Like, she's like, it was like that moment. She's like, we just looked at each other and went, oh my God.
It also shows you how much the police didn't search the scene of the scene.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's one of the reasons why she said it was a no shit moment, because she was just like, if they had just pulled back this bed, they would have been able to realize. So they end up going back and they end up figuring out what happened and stuff. And without Stanley's statement from him, they got the statement from the confidential informant from what Stanley told them. From what they got was Stanley had been basically raping and sodomizing Jessica for years, like 4 years. And she was obviously too afraid to tell anybody. As she got older, he kind of stopped, but she ended up seeing this boy and he didn't like it and stuff. And so he knew when Mike and Edna left along with the boys and stuff. And so he went to the house to confront her about her dating this boy. And when he did, they started arguing. And Jessica basically told her uncle, if you don't back off, I'm going to tell my boyfriend, which in turn would lead to Mike finding out, which in turn would lead to Stanley dying because Mike would kill him. And so Stanley attacked Jessica, and Jessica managed to get away from him and ran inside the house. Mm-hmm. And Stanley followed, and so she wasn't able to actually shut her door and lock it in time. And so they ended up fighting in her room, and he punched her in the face, broke her jaw, and knocked her out. And that's when he wrapped her up in her fitted sheet, fixed the bed, and then took her to the barn. Yeah. And she was there, so, and so he basically just did all this and then bullface lied to the family. Yeah. And I'm like, I don't know how you can do that. What? Yeah. So obviously the family was shocked, to say the least.
Right. Well, so here's the thing that to me was, in retrospect, a red flag. Not just the getting sick when they were right around the area where her body was, but also the fact that he drove to their house to find out if there was any more information. Right
on the night that her brother supposedly heard her screaming, "Help me, help me."
Right. Which means he was nearby. But also he drove there. He didn't call. And he wasn't helping at all. It was just, he was being involved in a pretend manner. Yeah. Overly, what's the word I'm looking for?
Inserting himself.
Yeah. Driving there instead of calling.
And to a normal person, it would be it's just a concerned uncle checking up on his niece, right? Which is understandable, because if my niece is missing, you bet your ass I'd be flying my ass out to Washington.
Instead, he was in love with his niece and jealous of her boyfriend, and so then he tortured her and killed her. Yeah,
yeah. So Stanley actually had lived with the Dishons for a bit and stuff, because he had been just on his troubles and stuff. And so they think that's when the stuff started between him and Jessica.
Well, because he was in jail for what now?
Yeah. Yeah.
Can we hear it again for those in the back?
Sex with a minor.
Right. So
sexual relations with a child.
And then they let him stay at their house?
Oh, no, this was before then.
Oh, that's better.
So it was only after Jessica went missing that he had gotten in trouble for sexual relations with a child. It was only after Jessica went missing that they had found all that out.
So it was with another minor, but then that still didn't make him a suspect.
Oh, it gets better. Nobody looked into him.
Nope.
Nobody looked into him.
Nope.
So they're obviously shocked, because they let this guy stay in their house. They helped them. They clothed them. They fed them. They got him a job.
Right. And this is how they think, how he thinks.
So Mike, when Lynn sat down, she told Mike, she's like, look, that I'm going to have to arrest your brother. And he goes, well, if he did it, I want the death penalty. Straight up. He basically just said, if he did it, I want the death penalty. And I can tell you right now, Stanley Dishon is not on death row. And I will tell you why. So Lynn ended up discovering more victims throughout the course of the investigation with Stanley. Yeah. He had been assaulting them, raping them. He had been threatening them, basically saying that I will kill you, I'll kill your parents, all this other stuff. But as they got older, he had stopped, but he still kept up with the threats. So it was 3 extra family members along with Jessica who were his victims. So four kids altogether. He was already being charged with their murder. He was already being charged with the kidnapping. He was already being charged with the rape. as well as all the other victims. But the thing is to get Stanley on death row, they would have needed those other 3 victims to testify, which meant that they would have had to get up there in front of the jury and be questioned by both the defense and the prosecution and have to go through all of that all over again. And one of the girls had actually, when Lynn had met with her and talked with her about it, as soon as she heard Stanley's name, she passed out. Like, that's how traumatic it was for these girls.
Rape is traumatic.
And so Lynn didn't want to put these girls through that. So she was like, you know what? Defense offered them a plea deal, offered prosecution a plea deal. And Lynn was like, there's nothing else that we can do. They took it. Because she knew in her heart that she wasn't going to let these girls have to go through the horror of having to tell everything that was going on. They were already getting him for the rape. They were already getting him for the murder. They were already getting him for the kidnapping. And so they were going to take the plea deal. But an option of the plea deal was that he only got a 20-year sentence and no death row. So that's the issue. Detectives actually, so after the case was done, after Stanley was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in Kentucky State Penitentiary, and I'm not saying 20 years to life, I'm saying he gets out after 20 years. Lynn goes back and starts looking at all the notes again and stuff. And she finds, kind of smushed in between some papers that she had missed before, a note from another confidential informant back in 2002 saying Stanley had confessed to him about Jessica's death with the exact same information that the informant in 2013 had said. Meaning that when they were trying to accuse Bucky of all of this and trying to put him on trial, they had this confidential note, but they decided not to take it seriously.
Right.
Means that they knew.
Did you want me to be shocked? Because let's look at how they handled everything.
Which means that they knew that Stanley could have been a suspect.
Right. But they already had a suspect in mind. And they were like, well, at this point, we already botched the investigation, so we can't also be wrong about who we're accusing.
Yeah, because that would just be so wrong. Because, why
let's not try and find the right guy. Let's just get somebody.
Why bring the right justice for a girl and stuff? Because here's the thing: if they had found that note, if they had actually taken that note seriously in 2002, maybe those other 3 family members could have been spared. Who knows when he started doing that to them? Because here's the thing: I couldn't find any ages. I couldn't find any birth dates. Nothing. They kept these, and I'm going to call them kids because even though when the trial came around, they were probably teenage to adult age and stuff. I'm going to call them kids because that's what I know them as. They kept these kids' identities hidden in a secret.
Yeah.
So this could have happened. So and the whole thing is, I don't think he was in jail in 2002 for child pedophilia. I think he was in jail for something else because this guy looked like he had this guy has a whole rap sheet against him.
Right. But the guy that he was cellmates with said that they were both in for that.
Yeah, but this is the one from 2002.
Oh, right. Yeah, no, he would have been in for something else.
We don't know what he was in for 2002. He could have been in for speeding or DUI or something. He could have been in for something. But he was basically, but what really just absolutely blows my mind.
Here's my question then. So he admitted to his cellmate.
He confesses twice to 2 different people with the same story.
Can I finish my question first? Hold on. So this was 1999.
Yep.
He was cellmates with somebody and admitted to her murder. So
in 2002.
Back to jail for something else, or did he get out? That's what I'm asking. Did he get out?
So he got out. So he went into jail in 2000. He went into jail around 2002. Admitted around that time to his first cellmate that he did this to Jessica. Got out, and then went back in around the 2013 time, around anywhere between 2010, 2013 when he was put back in.
Right.
Admitted to that other confidential informant. So there were 2 different guys, and he was out in between 2002 and whenever he went back in.
Right. So what you're saying is the second cellmate was the one who admitted it to Lynn? Okay.
Yes.
Now it makes it. Sorry, the timeline didn't line up for me quite right there. Okay.
Yeah. So it was the second cellmate that admitted to it. But the fact that they had this information from 2002.
Yeah.
And didn't do anything about it, that just blows my mind.
Was it also written on a napkin like half the other stuff they had?
It was written, because they get normal paper and pencils in jail and prison and stuff, so it was written like that. It was written in paper and pencil.
Yeah. No, I was making a joke because most of the case files were napkins and Post-it notes, and sorry, it was a joke.
But like,
because it could
and
blend
I'm
in
gonna
with all
say
the
this,
others if it was written on a napkin.
right? And I'm gonna say this because I don't work at the penitentiary anymore. But this guy, it's one thing to see him in an interview on TV. Okay, it's one thing to see him in an interview on TV. And granted, I had like concrete wall and like bulletproof like glass in between us and stuff, but he was still like right there.
Yeah.
And it's so weird because to this day, he like protects his innocence. He will tell it to anybody who listens. I did not kill Jessica. I didn't touch Jessica. I never had sexual relations with Jessica. Like, he ended up taking what's called an Alfred plea deal, basically saying that, yes, I'm admitting that you guys have enough evidence to charge me, but I'm not admitting my guilt.
Right. The same thing that happened with the Memphis 3.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's basically that same thing. And like this guy, just seeing him up close. And before I realized who he was and everything, because like I already had part of Jessica's case researched, I'd like done all that. Before I realized who he was, when I first saw him, like he looked at me as he's coming out of the cell and going to lunch and everything. I looked and I remember looking at something. I was like, who is that? She tells me, she's like, oh, that's Stanley Dishon. And I was like, God, he looks so familiar. I don't know why though. And then I went home and I ended up searching him and I was like, holy shit. Like it was insane. And this guy, like he's done interviews. Like if you look up Stanley Dishon online, he's done interviews inside Kentucky State Pen proclaiming his innocence. Mm-hmm. And the reporter's even like, well, what about all this evidence? What about these two different confessions from two different people with the exact same words that have never met each other before? Saying that you said these things. Oh, I never said that. So you're telling me that these two different people are lying. Oh, I never said any of those things.
Yeah,
I
that's
never heard
gaslighting.
Yeah. And so if you listen to the interview, I'll actually put a video of it on, it's a news clip that has the interview in it and has part of the jailhouse confession that the guy told Lynn and stuff. And also has Lynn talking to Stanley going, we know you did this.
Right.
Oh no. We know that you broke Jessica's jaw. Oh no. We know that you were sodomizing and raping Jessica. Oh no. We know that you killed Jessica because you were afraid her father would find out. Oh no. And I swear to God, he says, oh no, about 4 or 5 different times in the exact same tone.
Yeah.
Like and robotic. It makes you just want to punch him in the face. Mm-hmm. You're like, oh my God. Like I have so much like respect for this woman because she didn't just jump over that table and just beat the crap out of this guy. So
there'll be that clip on our website, truecrimeandchill.com.
Yes. So Jessica was her parents' world. Okay. She was an amazing big sister. She was a great friend. She was a really great student in school. She loved her 2 brothers and her brothers loved her. She was just a really wonderful girl. Like her dad in the interview that I saw on Cold Case Files, like I remembers how they would go hunting together and how she would ride his shoulders and how she would just hold his hands and like she was his best friend and stuff. And it was really like they had that bond. And so she would have actually been 39 this year. She would have had a family of her own. She would have had kids, maybe a grandkid on the way, like who knows. But that was taken away from her before she could ever really live. And instead, Stanley gets out in 2033. If he gets paroled, he'll be out in 2028. That is in 7 years. 7 years, and this guy could be walking the street. And Mike said in the interview that when Stanley does get out, whether it be in 2028 or 2033, he'll be waiting for him.
Thank you for listening to True Crime and Chill. For more information, including case notes, photos, and sources, visit our website at truecrimeandchill.com. You can also stay connected with us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Look for new episodes from us each week on Tuesdays.